welcome again. I also like to welcome Guy Rackham. Guy is the BIAN lead architect, so he will guide you to the whole of the ins and outs of the Service Landscape 2.0 that we published last week, to be precise, a week ago. The 2.0 landscape is a huge milestone for our association. We, in relation to the 1.6 version that we published in June last year, we moved from 17 described service domains to 63 service domains. We also added 39 business scenarios, and Guy will dive into that, what that exactly means. And I think the greatest achievement of this release is that we have it now available for the non-members in an HTML version. We took a lot of time and effort the last months to migrate all the material from the PowerPoint, the Excel sheets, the Word documents, and so on and so forth into the tool. So it's now within a central repository that, of course, increases the quality, but also gives you the opportunity to browse the HTML file, to drill down into it, and to click and wander around in the landscape. The advantage for the BIAN members is that we can provide them with an UML gateway, so they can upload it in their design tool, so that saves a lot of retyping of the material. That's another advantage of the tool. I think the tool will speed up our delivery process, and of course we have still some Word documents, PDF documents available, and PowerPoint in PDF as supporting material. But the real essence is the landscape in the HTML version. So Guy will guide you through it later on. First of all, and warm welcome to everybody around the globe. You see, I try to put on the globe where everybody is dialing in from, so that's very impressive and very encouraging. We as an association, the goal is to develop an open service-oriented architectural standard for the banking industry, and we are aiming for a global usage of that standard. We have around 35 members this moment in time, and the previous version of the landscape was downloaded a little under 5,000 times, so there is a lot of interest in the model, and as I know, there is also a lot of usage of the model, both by members and both by non-members. So again, a very, very warm welcome. We had a meeting this morning to accommodate other time zones, so I think the global reach out is very warming for us who work so hard to get that standard up and running. Just a short introduction on who we are and what we do. The Banking Industry Architectural Network is a not-for-profit association. We are a member-driven not-for-profit association, so the members are the highest decision-making body. It's also one member, one vote, and the aim of the association is to reduce the integration cost. What we see more and more, and you probably all know that by your own experience, is that if you buy an off-the-shelf product, let's call it a package, and you buy it for 100, and when you want to integrate it into your existing IT landscape, you have to pay an additional 400 to 500 to get it integrated. Well, those additional integration costs are, from our experience, killing most of the business cases that should enable banks to become more agile, offer new functionality, and so on and so forth, maybe replacing old legacy system by new systems. So if we can achieve the reduction of the integration cost, that would be a huge advantage, and that's more or less the aim why most of the members joined the association, to make that happen. And we are a global, so we have representatives, members in all regions of the globe, We are independent. We are not attached to whatever vendor or infrastructure or technology, and we are open. And it's a combination where banks, software providers and system integrators work jointly together to the same goal. So it's a mix of, we can call it the demand and the supply side. As we look at where we are today, when you look at this graph, we see that still the majority of the banks are using a proprietary SOA architecture, if there is any. We are moving from a BIAN perspective from our best practices that are internally driven, so are the best practices of our members, to the best practices that are also applied by non-members. We get a lot of feedback from non-members who are using the material, having comments, suggestions, and so on and so forth. So I would also like to encourage you, after studying the 2.0 material, that there is a feedback possibility at the BIAN.org site. So please help us in improving the quality or the richness of the product if you have something to add. The aim and the goal and the roadmap is that in 2014 we would like to see that we are becoming the de facto standard. Our roadmap foresees in the availability of all the major banking functions that they are described and available in HTML and UML at the end of this year, the beginning of next year. That means that we have all, and Guy will also point it out later on, we have all the functions available except the support functions like HR, building and equipment, and those more supportive functions that you see in the whole of the landscape of the other standardization bodies. We put very dominant in the middle ISO 20022. Everybody is acquainted with ISO 20022. It's the SWIFT administered business-to-business message standard. Similar messages, but also in the application space, so the physical message description you can find at the IFX forum, and BIAN is focusing on the business content semantic service definition. So we are describing services, not messages, in an, and I would always like to say it, in a natural language. We've done some case studies with IFX and ISO to explain that there are, if you take one BIAN service, you can find several ISO messages that you can use, or IFX messages that you can use. So we are not reinventing the wheel. We are trying to reuse as much as possible of the existing standard bodies. SWIFT is a BIAN member, and SWIFT donated the ISO 20022 meta model to BIAN. We extended that meta model into the application-to-application phase, so the meta model is in full alignment, the BIAN meta model is in full alignment with the SWIFT meta model. We also see OMG, Finance Domain Task Force. OMG is focusing very much today in the Finance Domain Task Force on the compliancy and legislation, and we are working in close collaboration with OMG to reuse each other's findings and material, so that we also don't have any overlap from that perspective. When we look at our current member base, and I just would like to underline current, we are going to announce some new members in the upcoming weeks, by the end of the month, around 6 to 7 new members. But this is our current member base. On the left-hand side you see the banks, and on the right-hand side you see our partners. So they are 34 in total. Last year we welcomed our first Asian bank, the Bangkok Bank. We welcomed Erste Bank from Austria, and UBS, well known. And from a partner perspective, we have Axio, the consultancy firm, originally from Switzerland, but they have a global presence with their own banking models. And we welcomed TCS, Data Consultancy. Of course, they are also very dominant both on the integration side and on the solution side. And Infosys joined but early, but Infosys is also one of the core bank suppliers. And different member is the Singapore Management University. It's our first academic partner, and Singapore Management University is in the postgraduate studies. They are using their own IT infrastructure, and in their IT infrastructure they are running different core banking systems from different vendors. They have a TIPCO enterprise service bus in place, and they are using the BIAN deliverables to do a core banking replacement from a case study, and they're going to emulate and simulate a merger where two of the core banking systems should work together, also using the BIAN deliverables. They are going to publish the results of that, so that's very interesting for both the financial industry, but of course also for us as an association to see and to feel a real proof of the pudding. So that was the short introduction of where we are and what we are doing. I will come back at the end, and I would like now to hand it over to Guy, who will guide you through the Service Landscape 2.0. Guy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Hans, and good morning, afternoon, good evening, and even good night time to some people. Can you hear me, Hans?
I can hear you very well.
Jolly good. Okay, so I'm going to take. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for your time and interest in BIAN. I'm going to take 20-25 minutes to take you through a few things. The Service Landscape 2.0 release itself. I'll put that in the context of where we've been and where we hope to go. As Hans said, a key aspect of this is delivering the model in an HTML format. So we'll go through looking at the model in those different levels, and recognizing that some of you may be new to BIAN. We've also pulled out a few of the key concepts from our own training materials to highlight there's a different way you need to look at these models to get the full value from them. So I've put a few slides towards the end that go over that ground. Hopefully it won't be too boring for those of you who are familiar. And then finishing off with some of the ways we see the membership starting to use these models. Now let's see if I can move the slides. So here we go. This is the first slide then. This captures what are the main elements in this version 2.0 release. On the top left-hand corner, for those of you that are familiar, you'll see the landscape itself, and there are certain additions and refinements, as there will always be as we go through these releases, to the landscape. To the right of that, that's the exact same information, but now in the model, and increasingly from here going forward, I think we're going to see model views of the landscape and its content. So this will be the first time for you, some of you seeing this, but we'll go through and hopefully help you understand enough as to how you can navigate the model in the next 20 minutes or so. The how-to guide has been updated. Not a lot of changes for there, but it's fairly. If you've not seen it, it's a fairly comprehensive tome, 50 or 60 pages, that covers how we create the content, the design concepts that BIAN is pioneering really to help come up with a service-oriented architecture that supports the canonical service standards, and our thinking behind why these service definitions are indeed canonical or consistently reusable across multiple organizations. That's buried in the how-to guide. A good read if you haven't been through that yet. Underpinning everything is the meta model and the UML repository. As Hans said, this is built on the ISO 20022 standard that is supported by Swift, and we have extended that model with the concepts of services, business services that address the A2A space, as Hans touched on. But there's a comprehensive definition and documentation behind that model, and that really is the underpinning for those of you who want to get into the detailed technology behind the BIAN standard. And additionally, there are these things we call business scenarios, which are really examples of use. We're not trying to define how things are executed, but in order to understand the service landscape and the service domains it contains, we've found both for creating the content and for understanding the content, coming at it through business scenarios that describe how a selection of service domains support a particular business activity or event is a very useful mechanism. So we've published the scenarios along with the landscape as part of 2.0. Right, so putting this in context, this is history up until the current point, and you can see we've been around for four years or more. It was the 1.0, 1.5, even 1.6 releases. The emphasis there was on getting the overall landscape and working behind the scenes to understand how we would create the service domains that are the basis for the landscape and the basis for defining the service operation standards. In 1.6, about half a year ago, July last year, we put out a fairly comprehensive landscape with most of the building blocks or service domains in there, and some examples of a scenario and initial service domain definitions, but not really sufficient content for you to do anything other than perhaps critically review the landscape itself as an overarching framework and the thinking behind the definition of service domains. With this release 2.0, there are a couple of key changes. One, I think we now see a lot more business scenarios, 39 you'll see there, and service with their underlying service operations described, so you can get your teeth into a little bit more. And then, just to reiterate, all of the data now is in this UML data repository, which makes it far more accessible than it's been in the past, where it's been in vast arrays of Excel spreadsheets. The how-to guide there, we've started to get case studies back from the membership, which is an encouraging and an interesting thing. They're very good read, those case studies, and hopefully we'll have more in the future. Where we see things going, BIAN, we tend to try and keep the pace up by having a sort of internal release schedule that's sort of every 6 months or so. So there is an internal 2.5 release where we're hoping to get, as you can see, a greater increase in scenarios and service domains. And then the next big external release will be the beginning of next year, a year from now, maybe slightly less, where we are hoping to have the majority of service domains covering all the banking-specific activities defined, as we term it, which means they actually participate in at least one scenario, have one service operation involvement, and a wider range of business scenarios to support that. We also anticipate breaking up the how-to guide and really targeting 3 different audiences: those that really want to understand the concepts, those that work within BIAN to create the content, and increasingly we think as we have more content, we need to provide comprehensive techniques and guidelines as to how you use this design in your different environment. And you'll see for the first time this model bank, or M4 bank, is going to be something that will take shape towards the end of this year, and looking towards 2015 be published more broadly. And this is BIAN's view of an example of taking all of our service domain building blocks and taking an example, complicated, full service, distributed, international bank, and saying these are how the standards might apply to create a model of your bank and how you might use it to analyze your systems, do investment planning, and all sorts of things. So the M4 bank is a very interesting example of use that we're developing in the background. As I said, now to said, we're on this UML data repository. We're hoping after going through the call today, you'll feel inclined to go and have a look at it. It's read-only, so you can't do any damage. And it's really something, I would say, that is best experienced interactively. You can just press the buttons and you'll find there are several structures for it to work as a UML repository. There are several lines you'll see in there that are necessary modeling links to hold the whole thing together. You'll only care about some of the buttons you press, and the best way to discover which ones matter to you is just to go and press them all and find which ones have content that resonates with you. On the following pages, I'll point to those key buttons, but what you need to do is just go and press buttons and navigate around the model, and believe me, you'll pick it up quick enough. But what we get by having everything now in this repository, because we've conformed to the meta model, we're maintaining all that referential integrity between all aspects of the design. So we're hoping we're going to get improved quality and consistency across the model. If you define a service operation, it is tagged to a service domain. If you define a business scenario, it will only allow you to build it from known service domains and service operations. And there are additional checks increasingly going to be built into the model to make sure that the content itself draws from accepted standard lists of definitions. Overall, we're going to see greater quality and consistency as a result of moving this into this environment. The publication is far easier. It's far easier to read. It's far easier for us to bundle it up and make it available. We can go through the 6-month publication cycle eventually because we can create material content now within the working groups internally within BIAN at a much greater rate, both as the teams get more familiar with how to use the model, and with the model they can focus on the content decisions and less along the sort of design discussions that have been a part of BIAN's activity to date. As an HTML tool, there will be increasing range of reports and capabilities enabling you to access the model from different views. It's a new model, so we're early days in understanding what are the best views and reports to generate, but I'm sure we're going to see an awful lot of activity there. And for those of you that are members, along with the meta model and the detailed definition of that, this is being a UML compliant tool. It's humanely possible to bring it into your own tooling or modeling environment if it's UML compliant. Add the few extensions that are specific to BIAN, and then access this as an interactive environment that you can bake into your own development procedures and techniques as you see fit. Right. So just to highlight within the release, there are a couple of things. I mentioned it earlier, the how-to guide, and for those of you that are members, the content of the how-to guide we've reformatted into 5 commented training presentations. So I'll go through some of the key thoughts briefly today, but these are the documents to go to as members or as guests, if you will, to check some of the design concepts and some of the things we'll go through fairly quickly today. One caveat to that, and we'll stress this as I go through some of the examples today, is the how-to guide currently still has in it the Excel formats that we were using. There's no different content, but they do look slightly different, so I'll show you as we go through the rest of the presentation how things might look in the how-to guide and how that translates into the views you would see in the HTML tool. But it's essentially all the exact same content, just slightly different colors and boxes. Okay, so moving on to the actual landscape itself. This is the highest view of the landscape. Its structure is grown historically. We have these dark blue boxes at the top are our business areas. This is how we've broken the problem down. There are obviously many different ways you can organize this. The key component of this, if you will, is the service domain. And so what we're looking at here in the landscape structure is really a reference framework where we put all of the individual service domains in to help you find them. And so the business areas define major, if you like, groupings of business activity. The business domains are sort of slightly tighter defined business functional areas, and within each of those we uniquely allocate the individual service domains. So the landscape is a reference framework. It's almost like a discrete business function. Pressing the wrong button here, beg your pardon. So this was the version of last July, where we had 247 service domains. We had, if you remember, just the one published business scenario and a handful of service domains. The internal working groups have been churning away, and as we get to now 2.0, in doing that work, we've discovered a few missing service domains, and I think that will continue. We'll see every release, a handful or more service domains discovered when the working groups get into really analyzing the behaviors in their particular area. And a working group addresses a particular business area, and I'll come back to that a little bit more later. But as they drill into it and create their business scenarios, we do identify that the landscape as is sometimes has holes in it. Also, we find that we may rename service domains to be more representative of a better definition of their use. So I'm afraid we will have to deal with, as we go through creating content, a few additions and changes to the service landscape. And as you can see in 2.0, there have been, I think, an addition of 16 service domains, and we've renamed a handful, 7 or so. But the overall content hasn't changed overly significantly. And if you're familiar with the old content, the additions tend to add new capabilities rather than really destabilize what's there already. Here you'll see the same landscape and just some color coding used to show that summary of where we've been and where we're going that I went through earlier. You'll see version 2.0 with the orange color, so light blue and orange has gone before. And you'll see we've got a good smattering of samples, but there's really quite a lot of the landscape still open. The yellow is where we will be the middle of this year, but still quite a lot of open space. And the most aggressive release, I think, will be the beginning of next year with 3.0, where our goal is to have some kind of activity covering the majority of the landscape. The business support area you see off to the right there, with a couple of exceptions, is not banking specific. It's the types of business activities you'll find in every business: HR, systems development, the facilities, those sorts of things. We see addressing those as necessary, but lower priority than having a full view of all the banking activities. So 3.0 will be a pretty significant release early next year. So we've been talking about the landscape, and the key element of the landscape, if you will, is this thing called a service domain. And a nice way of thinking of this is, and what we're trying to do with the BIAN design is to break business down into its elemental building blocks. So there's a picture of the periodic table of elements up there. It's just like everything that you see on the planet and universe, in fact, is made up of a small number of elements that combine into molecules and substances, if you will. And what we're saying is we believe that from a certain perspective, you can look at a business and the commercial activity that goes on in the business as a discrete set of elemental capabilities. And the service domain represents one of those capabilities. And it has some properties that we use to define it and correct that we've correctly scoped it as we go through discovering and building these into the landscape and our scenarios. And let me just read off some of those properties. So when we define a service domain, for example, the capability to create and maintain and access and report on product designs or customer agreements or handle customer interactions. These three things are business activities, each of which has a service domain that handles it. We look at it as being a service center, and I mean that in the sort of business access and capability use. It's something you can go to ask to do something for you. We always tend to think of this in systems terms, but it really is a combination of people, procedures, and the systems that support them. So think of it as a part of the business and not just a systems partition in itself, although at the end of the day we are really focusing on the supporting systems in defining most of our systems operations. Someone's responsible for it. It's really just a check to say, have I discovered a part of the business that is an operational or functional unit? Typically, if that's the case, then you can also associate some individual or group with the correct operation of its role. And another check we like to have is if we've got one of these scoped correctly, it may not be sensible to do so, and you may not do it to one in isolation, but you can imagine it being provided to you by an independent party. So if you're looking at credit scoring your customers, for example, could you imagine externalizing that activity and having someone else determine what is a suitable credit score for you? You may or may not want to do that, but as a business activity, it can make sense or can be considered practical to do so. In terms of some of the underlying technical properties, We want to make sure that it's unique and non-overlapping. It's elemental. There's some rules to say that we right-size this, that we get it down to the right level of granularity. And that's a fairly complicated but important principle. We won't have time to go into that today, but if you're of an architectural bias, then look at the how-to guide and the training, and even come back to us if you want to really understand how we right-size these service domains, because it is an important design concept. We hope the landscape is collectively comprehensive. By that we mean anything that goes on in the business should be modelable by a collection of service domains collaborating. It has this thing called a focus of, which is really a record of it performing its business role and tracking it from the beginning to end, which is the next point, the full life cycle. So each service domain handles its thing, say a product design, but it handles it from its inception to its termination, for want of a better word. It handles all of the life cycle for it. So all of its service operations and all of its involvement in the business is handled by the single service domain that owns it, or all instances of it, for its full life cycle. As I said, it can handle, depending on its business role, a service domain can be handling a single thing, like a corporate strategy, or multiple instances, for example, all of the customer agreements in force. Depending on its role, it might be sensible for it to be handling single or multiple instances of whatever it is it's handling. And these things can be around for a short time, like a customer interaction, or a long time, a product design. And the last point is it's service-based. So these are all design concepts. Again, I'm skimming over these quite quickly just to give you a flavor, but you can always pop back to the training materials to get a more comprehensive definition to get comfortable with it. So let's dive now into what the actual model shows us, and that you'll see on the next few slides. There's the picture of what it might be seen, how it might be seen in the how-to guide and in other document areas, and in the service domains themselves are all visible on this service landscape view. And you can drill down to some extent from here, but it's not fully linked. But there is this check, if you will, that everything in the landscape is in fact in the model. So then let's go on to the next level. So at the same point, we can drill into business scenarios. So you'll see at the high level menu a selection of business scenarios, and here is a diagrammatic representation of the business scenario with the service domains involved at the top. You see the Excel spreadsheet up here to the right, sorry, the PowerPoint version to the right, which has the exact same information. In fact, in the UML model, we've sneaked in a little bit more information, because for those of you more familiar with the content, we do, when we talk about a service exchange or service operation between two service domains, we have slightly different flavors of these, depending on how we anticipate the interaction going, and that's actually included in the UML model. We didn't used to have that in the simple PowerPoints. But other than that, if you're familiar with the business scenario, this is how it looks in the UML tool, and we have, as I say, the choreography of the service operations for an archetypical flow of activity to address a particular business event, and that's what we call the business scenario. If we look at the drill down, now we can see a bit of the menu here see on the left. This is sort of a menu structure most of you will be familiar with, but this is how you pop down. So you can take the scenarios, or you can take the landscape. The scenarios will get you to the list of diagrams, one of which I just showed you. The service landscape, you can pop down. You pick the service landscape, you pick the business area, which is any of these large blue columns. You pick the business domain, which is the light blue column. And eventually you'll get to the service domain itself. And what we're showing here is the overview, which has got the basic description and a model of the focus object, which, if you like, is that control record associated with each service domain. And that's how you pop down. And these things expand as you drill down on the model. And the next thing we can see then is within the service domain, you can then drill down again for the service operations in the Excel spreadsheets. We used to categorize these in 4 areas, 4 types of service operations, if you will. Invoke and execute here being one of them, and then you can see the actual inputs and outputs of that specific service operation in screens below. So the whole hierarchy you can drill down using the menu structure, and you'll find from the service landscape through business scenarios, through service domains, down to their service operations, the actual input and output parameter descriptions. Everything is linked together in the model and available for you to read. And as I said, it's a read-only model, so you can go and press all of these buttons. Some of them will produce UML linking structures that you probably won't understand, but you will come across the content as you navigate the model and get familiar with it. It's not too difficult. Okay, as I said earlier, I wanted just to touch on a couple of design things, and I'll do this very quickly in the interest of time. These are covered in the how-to guide, but it is important when you look at these designs that you realize that the BIAN model or representation of business is a little bit different to what many of us are more familiar with when we do process models. And here's an analogy. I mean, if I think of a building architecture, I can look at the town plan, if you like, and that's really the map of the city. And I can think of route planning, the journeys that go on in the city. These have sort of equivalent activities in a business. I can look at a business and say, what is my business made up of? What are the assets, the finances, the buildings, the intangible assets like know-how and relationships that make up my building? And then the process is the execution of activity that uses those processes. One of the conjectures I would put forward is that we're really good in business at process-based views. We don't actually have, to the same way that building architects have their town plans, we don't have very good and well-linked or mapped equivalent to town plans or resource views of the business. We have them, but they're not integrated as well with the process optimization. And that leads to a problem. If in town planning we didn't have the town plan to organize where we built the buildings, and when we built them, we end up with the shanty town. And many of you working in and with banks might recognize this same schematic representation of the application portfolios often found in many of the larger banks, often an array of overlapping applications. And what we really want to do is define non-overlapping boundaries for these so that through our service operations we can increasingly eliminate this overlapping complexity and the proliferation of proprietary services you get when you try and connect all these overlapping systems together to gradually or incrementally move towards this future view where progressively we have more and more of the business capabilities providing service-based access, and they provide discrete non-overlapping services, and gradually the complexity erodes away over time. And that is if you like, saying schematically what Hans referred to earlier as getting interoperability improved in the application-to-application space. It's really eliminating this redundancy and overlap by standardizing the boundaries and services and moving towards a more consistent model. If you think that all of that's a little bit of a leap, let me just take one very brief example of a business activity that we might think of happily as a process and show how the exact same thing can be remodeled as BIAN service domains collaborating through services without really changing it. So if we take the month-end billing process, if we were building a process application, we would break it down to the sort of elemental steps and then build applications with input, process, output structure and automate that as an end-to-end process. And we're very comfortable with that kind of view of building applications that take a particular end-to-end process, decompose it to its steps, and then automate it. Between 5 service centers. One is responsible for all instances of the card, sold instances of cards. It handles, if you like, the workflow and rules for your card. Something else will take the customer contract, the legal terms and conditions that you've agreed that may govern how that card is processed for you, like the cycle date, like interest and fees that apply. An underlying account record of the transactions, payments in and payments made with the card. Some capability to generate correspondence to and from you, to track, send you invoices and receive payments from you, and the ability to transfer money from A to B, from your account to our account if we're sending you an invoice, or from your account to someone else if you're using the card. So these are 5 service domains, and we can remodel that end-of-month billing process as a set of service interactions between them. And let's draw that slightly differently to really cement the point. There's the process. in the top left-hand corner, there's the exact same business event, if you like, modeled as a set of service operations. And each of those 5 building blocks corresponds one of our service domains in this overall landscape, each of them having those properties I described earlier, being a service center, its people process systems, it has its responsible party, and it can be outsourced and insourced, and the technical things I mentioned earlier. That's, if you like, just a flavor of how business activity can be remodeled and implemented using these BIAN service domain structures. I only wanted you to get a flavor of that so that you know what you don't know and can go read the user guide if you're not fully comfortable with the service domain and a service-oriented architecture built that way. So now just coming to the last couple of points I want to make before handing it back to Hans. Our members have started to use these models increasingly, and as I say, there are two case studies in the current how-to guide, and I think we're going to see a load more in the coming months and years. They tend to fall into 2 categories. We call them targeted and enterprise loosely. Targeted being where we use the service domain boundaries and operational services to streamline, rationalize, or simplify a particular business activity. And increasingly people are seeing, hey, I can take the service domains and build this overarching enterprise blueprint, if you will, and use it as a planning and governance tool for my business or a substantial division of my business. So let's see a couple of things. Let's look at that in a couple of contexts. So for the targeted solutions, often as not, we'll come in with a business scenario or a group of business scenarios that handle, say, onboarding a customer or originating a loan or whatever it is that I want to streamline. And the service domains and the service operations give me a high-level framework, organizing framework for either repurposing and realigning my existing systems or augmenting them perhaps with a package out or building something. And without getting into detail as to how, it's very much an aspect of BIAN designs that they can be sensibly interpreted in very different technical environments. We are implementation agnostic, and part of the documentation that we've all produced for 3.0 will go into this in a little bit more detail. But you should be able to interpret these designs to rationalize, improve, package legacy applications, to work in sort of hybrid environments, and also they're interestingly well aligned to more advanced cloud type distributed smart network models for implementation as well for aspects of the business. And a second point to make on this is, as I said earlier, these designs don't require a big bang. You don't actually have to throw everything out and start again. It is possible to target particular business areas and their associated service domains and incrementally create these and integrate them within the legacy environment. So unlike rationalization initiatives in the past, we do believe that the service-oriented architecture-based use of these designs does give most banks a sort of a manageable path to reorganizing. And then the last slide before handing you back to Hans is the alternate use of this where, or last 2 slides, sorry, where we take the service landscape, which has one and only one of each service domain, and recognize that in a big business, typically there may be service domains that they don't care about, certain products they don't cover, for example, and then they may have a geographic distribution. They may centralize certain things. They may have repeated call centers in different regions of the world, whatever. You need to take the service domains, filter them. You may need to slightly resize or define them for unique proprietary aspects of the enterprise, and then reflect its distributed organization and often its legal entity structure to build an overarching blueprint of the business, an example of which we're developing with the M4 Bank, incidentally, which has a lot more detail in this simplistic schematic you're seeing here. And then the sorts of things people are doing with this, once they've got this blueprint of their business, is they're overlaying things like their systems or their people to do resource mapping and seeing where there are gaps or duplication or systems that do one thing very well that are being stretched into areas that they're not appropriate for. The feature classification up at the top, we might be looking at aspects of the business and classifying them as being high security or suitable commodity activities for seeking an outsource solution, or high decision-based areas of the business where we need to do something clever with the technology. There are all sorts of feature classifications you can consider. And then the last example used here is where it's really used as a performance dashboard, where you take the temperature of your business using this framework as a sort of stable overlay to track and project and determine budgets and track performance, using this as a nice stable framework of your overall enterprise. So these are the sorts of analyses and uses for the second type of use of the BIAN model, which is the enterprise perspective. So I think that's my lot. I'll hand you back to Hans to wrap, and then hopefully have a bit of time left for questions. Thanks, Hans.
Okay, Guy, thank you very much. I think you took us in a real you stayed very close to your audience. So thank you so much, and we'll come back to you with some questions after I have just a short explanation of how we operate. So first, I would like to explain a little bit how we are organized. This is the org chart of BIAN. You see on top the General Assembly. I already explained that we are a member-driven association, so the General Assembly, that is one member, one vote, and they make all the decisions, for instance, like appointing the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors appointed me as the Executive Director, and then we have all the different working groups underneath. That's maybe a little bit too much to elaborate on, but the Architectural Committee is made up of the Chief Architects out of our members, and the Chief Architects here in that Architectural Committee are the highest decision-making body on the content. So everything that will be published, everything we want to change on our governance model or working procedures and so on and so forth need to be approved by the Architectural Committee, and they bring their recommendations to the Board of Directors, and the Board of Directors will decide. So the 2.0 went through an extensive review mode at the Architectural Committee, and then it was decided to publish. I skipped some of the other groups, but the groups that are doing all the real work, populating the landscape, making all the service definitions, are the groups you see here in the dark green and in the gray area. The dark green groups are the groups who are for a longer time up and running. So we have analytics, party, payments, product and price, channels, lending, and investment and trading. Just started are the working groups retail and banking consumer products and corporate banking products, and we are hoping to start the gray ones somewhere at the end of March, the beginning of April, to help us to fulfill our roadmap. And Guy already explained that we have the support functions, the business operation, the business development like HR and buildings and equipment and so on and so forth, that we have placed at a lower priority. So we look into those areas in 2014. So this is the group. The Architectural Framework and Foundation group is the group that is responsible for the tooling and the meta model. And we have an additional business vocabulary group that makes sure that we use the same terminology throughout the model. They are also tool-driven. The business vocabulary group is driven by Scotiabank in Canada. The Architectural Framework and Foundation group is driven by IBM in collaboration with SunGard. The Service Landscape group is driven by ING Bank and SAP. And so when we would go into all those groups, you see often a combination of a bank and a vendor as the chair and the co-chair of the group. So this is the way we populate the landscape. This is our current board of directors. The chairman of the board for 4 years now is Steve van Wijk. Steve was the former CIO of ING Bank. He joined PNC Financial Services January 1st. He said, I'm elected by the members until May 2014, and I would like to stay in that position because I believe in the goals that we set in our objectives. So we are very proud that Steve, whilst joining PNC Financial Services, is also chairman of the BIAN board. The board member from day one since 2008 is David Vender from Microsoft. David is also our treasurer. We have Don Trotter from SAP, the Global Head of Banking at Industry Development from SAP, David Hamilton from SunGard, and Cheyenne from IBM. And as you look at this board, you would understand that we would like to see a more 50-50 balance in it between the banks and the vendors. So the board is doing their utmost best to attract out of our member base additional board members with some banking background. Then how to become a member. We already explained the difference between a member and a non-member. The non-members, which the majority of you are, have access to all the published material. So when we decide to publish, you have access. So I always say you more or less consume the future, and the members, they are creating the future. The members, we already explained, have access to all the work in progress, the meeting minutes, but also to our meetings, the physical meetings. They have access to the UML, they have access to the tool, and they have access to the M4 banking model. So there is a difference in the members and the non-members. We are striving to be an open standard, so it's our aim to publish all the material and make it available with no IP rights, with no cost to the public, and that we are very successful in that. I explained already 5,000 downloads, but there is a huge advantage in being a member, so you have access to a little bit more of the material in an earlier stage. We have different membership categories. We have the larger technology vendors / integrators. We have the banks as a category, of course, and we have the smaller ones. So this is the membership category and the membership fees. I explained earlier we are a not-for-profit association, so our only income is the membership fee. We are not allowed to have any other income, and we need that membership fee to set up meetings like this, to have a guy involved, to have the website and all the material and so on and so forth. So we need the membership fee for progressing and moving forwards, and the board decided that the majority of our membership fees should be spent on content delivery. That's why we're speeding up the content and making sure that we at least have 2 releases on a yearly basis. There are different membership categories. We have 3 times a year we have a physical meeting. The next meeting is March 12 to 15 in London, hosted by Microsoft at their campus in Reading. So everybody who is interested in attend the introduction day that goes ahead of that to join us in London to have a more personal insight, please drop us a mail at info@bian.org. And meet Guy in person, because he will also be there all day. So that is also an incentive to meet him in London. Also the next level is the participation level of members who say we are not able, due to a merger or acquisition or huge project or programs, to actively contribute into the working groups. So, but we are willing and able to do reviews of material produced. Very valuable. So that's the second level. And the board made a decision at the beginning of last year that we will never publish any material without the approval and the QA done by one of our bank members. So it should always be bank approved before we bring it out into the open. And the third engagement level, and from my perspective the best engagement level, is to actively contribute in one of the working groups, as I showed you on the earlier slides. And that is of course a time consuming issue involved. The working groups meet, besides that they meet physically 3 times a year, they also have their virtual meetings like we have now. This is a call combined with the web session, and they usually do that every 2 to 3 weeks for 2 hours. So on an average, a working group member has to spend between 10 and 15 days to participate in a working group. So I would encourage everybody in the call to look into it and see if you can contribute or will contribute into those working groups. So we now are at the Q&A. I have one thing that I just overlooked. We saw Guy using and explaining the HTML file. The HTML file, you can also exit it by your tablet. I used it on my iPad. It's very impressive. You can also drill down and do on your iPad. You can also do it on your iPhone. Now the screen is a little bit of a limitation on the iPhone, but it's completely portable, so you can use it on any device outside the office, so outside a laptop or a desktop. So I think I'm very proud of that aspect. So I would like to open the room for questions. You can type in your question if that's preferable. Otherwise, if you want to unmute, then press *6 to unmute. Okay. Let's see. I think this is one for you to answer, Guy.
Right, and it's going to be difficult to answer it briefly because I rambled on earlier. We haven't got a lot of time here. Yes, the authentication authorization is somewhat an area in the channels that we've come up. So internal network operations is access rights to external services, like if we subscribe to services and prices or information news. Authentication and authorization look at the aspects of verifying your identity when you present yourself at a channel, and then authorizing what type of access might you have to your products and services through that channel. So it's much more a control access mechanism is the distinction between these. I'll look at these in more detail to make sure that the descriptions we have are appropriate, but there are certain differences between the two. Hope that handles it, Wolfgang.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Contact me if it doesn't, Wolfgang, and I'll answer your question in more detail, referring to the specific service domains. But good catch. And that was one of the more interesting areas of extension to the model that came up with the channels working group. Very interesting stuff there.
So everybody can post his questions at info@bian.org. So feel free to do so, and we'll make sure that Guy or someone else is answering that question. And I see one coming up again, a new question from Carlos. I'll just wait and see what Carlos is asking. I can also, in the meantime, say that I received a question earlier if we can make the model then translate it into Spanish. Well, you will understand that if we translate into Spanish, we also have to do it into French and into Mandarin, and so on and so forth. And that's not maintainable in this moment because it's still in development mode. So we keep one English version, and maybe in due time, when it's more stable and we are moving from development mode into maintenance mode, we can think of different languages. But for the time being, we have to stick to English to make it feasible and workable with the members.
That's one for Hans.
Well, the answer is no in this moment in time. We are have discussion with central banks, but what we also do, we are re-evaluating our current membership categories to see if we need some additions, additional groups. For instance, we added the academic partner as a new category last year, so it's we are rewriting our business plan. So we hope somewhere in the summer period, in June, July period to have something around those new membership categories. One of the complicating factors is that if we want to change the categories, we need to have the approval of all the BIAN members in the General Assembly. So there is a lot of paperwork / bureaucracy involved, but okay, that's something for us to deal with. But it's a good question, and it's in our plan to look at it, what it should look like. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll do, Carlos. Just I will ask Yvonne to forward me your contact details from your. Okay. Well, then we are over the hour. I would like to thank everybody for their participation. I would like to thank everybody for their attention, the time that they. I am convinced, to be quite honest, that it was a useful session. Please take a look at the material, go to the BIAN.org site and go into the HTML, but also into the PDF files that are available. The how-to guide gives you valuable background information of why we do things as we do it, and what the underlying ideas and thoughts are within the models. If you have questions, remarks, suggestions, improvements, don't hesitate to contact us, and we are very much in favor of having people, members and non-members, helping us to improve what we are doing. So